Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And today I am here with Beth Akers, a new friend of mine. I had not heard of Beth before, and I'm so happy to meet you. Beth is an economist, a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and author of a fairly newly released book, Making College Pay. So my first question is, what do you mean? I love the title, but what do you mean by it? How did you come upon that?
Well, so I'm an economist. And so when I talk about higher education, I'm often talking about the dollars and cents of the decision. And so making college pay was really an offer to readers to say, if you are among the 90% of people who report that they're going to college to make more money and have a return on their investment, then this book is going to tell you how to do that. Of course, it's a little bit snarky too, because I'm a little bit hard on the institutions in this book. I'm not sure colleges will love what I have to say, because I kind of say, don't just assume that they have your best interest at heart. You got to be a savvy consumer. So making colleges pay is kind of the undertone.
Okay, well, I love that. I'm going to get your book. I'm going to read it after the interview.
Great.
So one of the things that we talk about, because we talk about college a lot. In fact, some people criticize that we talk about college too much on our platform. But we talk about this concept that was relatively new for those of us who had sent kids to college before. But, the list is supposed to have schools that we used to call reach and safety, but also add to that a school that is a good financial fit for your family. I still don't know how to figure that out because, and I loved your analogy. I heard you say that the process is like going to the grocery store without having prices on the shelves. And when you get to pay, you're like surprised. Oh, cherries were $20. No, thank you. I don't want cherries. So that's what college feels like to me. I've done it 5 times now with 5 kids. And people say, do you have a good financial fit college on the list? How do I know? If so many people aren't paying full price, how do I know where I fit into that story?
The answer is that you have no idea until you've applied, until you've gotten your financial aid package. So college pricing is like notoriously opaque. We know that. Policymakers have even tried to fix it by putting net price calculators on college websites by regulation. And so in theory, you can go to the website and see, okay, I make this much money. What are they going to charge me on average? Those are unreliable. Don't bother using them. So
wait, don't bother using them at all?
Well, they're unreliable. So you can use them if, it may be better than no information, but it's not going to give you the right answer. So it's very likely that it overestimates how much aid you're actually going to get from the institution. So it's really problematic. The truth is, the only way to know how much an institution is going to cost you is to apply. I mean, you can use some basic principles, like my family has really high income, and so I'm not going to get a lot of merit aid. But on the other hand, if your student is a scholar and has exceptional test scores and they'd love to have your student bump up their average SAT score in the college catalogs, then, that could be an advantage for you in terms of merit aid. But the truth is,
you said merit aid twice. So the first one, if you make a lot of money, you're probably not getting financial aid.
Yeah. Yeah. So colleges play this game. Economists call it price discrimination, which is not a great term. Colleges call it discounting, which is that if I'm a college administrator and your child wants to come to my school, I look at what they bring to my campus, and I look at what you have in terms of personal finances to potentially pay the price. And then I'm going to set a price for you specifically that is the highest price I think that you're going to pay. And that's the game. We can call it discounts, call it a mix of need-based aid, call it a mix of merit aid, but it's price discrimination. It's the colleges setting a price for you as an individual. Ron Lieber has a great new book on college pricing, and he talks about how what colleges are doing is actually quite similar to what airlines are doing. We all know when we sit on a plane that everyone around us has paid a different price for their seat. We don't know that the same game is happening in college, but it is. It's the exact same business, and it's a bit unsavory when you think about it that way, because we like to think that the colleges are our friends, but this is the business that's going on. And honestly, the only way to know how much you potentially would pay for an institution is to apply.
So I think I first heard this term in Ron's book. a pre-read?
I'm not quite sure what that one is.
Oh, so there are some schools where you can ask the school to tell you what it will cost you. And some schools even commit to that number. Not anything you're so familiar with.
I'm not super familiar with it, which makes me think that it's not really widely available. But I'd say if it is an option and you can certainly ask, then it could be valuable information for you.
I mean, that could be that could solve the problem, right? Like you could, if ask the school financial aid office, would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, Ron also talks in his book more than I do in mine about negotiating with the financial aid office and realizing that it is a bit of a negotiation. And so that can be one of the things you're interested in negotiating on, which is finding out that information sooner. I don't think that that's a universal solution, but it may be that an individual family can go to certain institutions and get that information in advance, and it can't hurt to ask, that's for sure.
Right. Okay, so you talk a lot about risk because you're an economist, and that's such an interesting concept around college. I think we mostly don't talk about college that way. So what do you mean by it's a risk?
Forever people in my world, which is like this policy community around higher education, kept saying college is too expensive, college is too expensive, college is too expensive. And of course, parents are saying college is too expensive, college is too expensive. And the economist in me is saying, wait a minute. We know that if college were an investment like the stock market, the rate of return that people are getting on average is 15% for associates and bachelor's degrees. That's double what you get in the stock market. So actually, this is a great deal, right? You're paying for something up front, but it's giving your student access to so much more earnings later on that it's worth it. But that's not totally satisfying because that's what's true on average. For any individual, there's always the chance that you start college, maybe you don't finish, or maybe you finish, but the college you went to turned out to be sort of a lemon institution, or the major you picked was not a great one, and then your degree doesn't pay. So when the price is high, but the reward is really high, I'm not worried. So when there's variation in what college can bring you, that's what an economist would categorize as risk. And the reason that's helpful is because we have solutions for risk. So if we just think of the problem that we as families are trying to solve as a financial risk problem, then we can think about different sorts of solutions than the ones that we were previously looking at.
Well, what are some of those solutions?
Well, I in the book talk about some of the innovative things that are happening in this space. And so when you think risk, naturally, the next thing you might think is insurance, right? Driving a car is risky, so we have car insurance. Having a home is risky, so we have homeowners insurance. Going to college is risky. Why don't we have college insurance? It turns out that we are starting to have college insurance. Not all institutions have a financial program that looks like insurance, but a growing number do. They come under all sorts of different names. Some are literally, offering what they're calling degree insurance. Some are offering wage insurance. Some are offering a job placement guarantee. Some are using income share agreements as an alternative to student loans. And what all of these things do is compensate your student if they go to school, but then don't get that earnings bump that they were really hoping would justify the upfront cost. So that's something to seek out if your family is particularly concerned about that potential downside of paying for a degree that doesn't ultimately pay.
So can we go a little bit more into the income share agreements? Because to me, that tells me that the institution believes they can deliver the product.
Yeah. So let's go over briefly what an income share agreement is, kind of an alternative to a loan. So imagine, Sue, you're coming to my college and, you have another $10,000 to cover after your federal financial aid and federal student loans. And I say, okay, how about this? I'll pay that $10,000 for you. And instead of you paying it back on a monthly basis, like a car loan or something, how about you just tell me that you'll pay me 2% of your salary for 5 years after you graduate. And if you don't make a very high salary, you can pay me nothing. The advantage here is that if you don't do well after you finish, you're going to pay me back nothing. And that's great. That means you're paying for what you get. On the other hand, if you do really well, you're going to pay a little bit more. It's sort of like paying for health insurance and never getting sick, right? I mean, it's not a scam. It's just kind of how it works. So that's how income share agreements are working. We've seen them pop up at Purdue, the University of Utah, here where I live in Salt Lake City, has a new income share agreement program, and a lot of other smaller institutions, non-degree programs and credential programs are using these as a financing tool. And I think they align the incentive for the institution to serve you well because they only get paid if you do well. And it's good for you because it protects you in the case that you don't do well after you graduate. So I think they're a win-win, and I think they're an exciting solution that I hope we see more of.
I love it also because, like, you know, with insurance, with healthcare insurance, you hope you don't need it, right? Like, it's like a cost that you hope you don't need. So
Right.
to do really well out of college and have to pay more than the $10,000 back, I want that story.
Right.
That's a good story.
I've talked to some of the financiers behind these products, and they tell me that students are always really worried that they're going to be Mark Zuckerberg and come out of school making millions and have to pay back, you know, so much money. And so in practice, what they do is they put a cap. So they say, okay, if you come out and you're making billions in your first year, you only have to pay us, I think it's usually like 2 times the original amount. So in the worst case, Sue, you come out of my school, you graduate as a billionaire, you only have to pay me $20,000, and then we'll just like call it there. But
well, any numbers around the odds of coming out making billions?
I can't tell you the exact numbers, but I assure you they're very, very, very low.
I think it's probably easier to play a college football team than to come out a billionaire, which is also minuscule.
Or maybe buy a bunch of lottery tickets or something. I don't know. I think if that's what you're shooting for, college is probably not the fastest path to get there.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so Deborah Fish, sorry, I missed your comment. She says horrible, that's why it's so overwhelming, but I don't know what that was in reference to. So if you want to put a question down, and those who are listening, we can give Beth some questions. She knows a lot from a very different perspective than we usually talk about. Okay, so I want to talk about the idea that you mentioned of looking backwards, that where do you ultimately want to be? And we had one college counselor do that with one of my kids, and I'd never thought of that. Like, the question was, if you want to go into animation, where does Disney hire from? Carnegie Mellon. So you should make Carnegie Mellon your goal. Now, that's not what my kid wanted to do, but I thought, wow, you could do that. Right. So you talk about that.
Yeah. So, you know, I give this advice of working backwards, of having a goal of where you want to end up so that you can figure out what major, what institution, what city do I need to be in order to make that happen. And people are critical of that advice a lot of times because they're saying, you know, when I was 18, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think the value in doing that is actually the exercise itself, because too often we're telling kids that college is just the springboard to all of their dreams, right? We've kind of packaged a bachelor's degree now as being part of the American dream. So you've got to have the white picket fence and the bachelor's degree. And it's kind of this very abstract idea that it's just something that you should do. And so I think having a goal, even if that goal ultimately changes, you know, puts the right frame on the decision, which is that college is a tool to get you somewhere. And that somewhere may not be the first place that you imagine it's going to send you. And for sure, it's not. And most of us never imagined we'd be doing what we're doing today when we first started. But that's okay. It's the idea that if you have no plan, you've got yourself in a much riskier position than if you have some plan and if the plan is allowed to change. So if you're someone who doesn't have a trust fund or sitting on infinite sums of cash in your bank account, then, you know, I would recommend having a plan. And if you are so lucky, then go ahead, wander through college, allow passion to strike you like a bolt of lightning and do all those things that we normally talk about with college. But, you know, think about, can you really afford that path? It's an expensive and potentially financially risky one.
And the exercise in and of itself is valuable.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so Deborah clarified for us. I'll let her come on with this. She's just making a comment, which is, it's horrible, the different costs per person and family ability to pay, making it too high and worries the students and parents, especially single parent families. Yeah, thanks, Deborah, for sharing that. Okay, you talk a lot about graduation rate being a really important statistic. So first tell us why you think it's the most important or one of the most important, and then how do you find that out?
Great. So a third of people who start college degrees will not finish. This is a huge problem because the returns in the labor market to a college degree only come when you graduate. Half of a college degree does not get you half of the earnings bump that you would get if you got a full college degree. So what we have is a lot of people in this country starting school, borrowing to pay for school or using their own cash to pay for it, and then ending up, quote unquote, underwater, like we used to say about, mortgages on homes that were worth less than what people borrowed for. And so we've got a student loan crisis of people with very small balances who can't afford to repay. So these are people who walked into college and didn't finish. No one starts college and thinks I'm going to be among this 1/3 of people who don't finish my degree. If you're shelling out money to pay for courses and enrollment, you are imagining that you will cross that finish line. So we know that some institutions are better at getting people across that finish line than others. And I think that it's an incredibly important dimension to shop for college on, because it is a huge source of that financial risk that we were talking about. So the place you go for this is kind of the holy grail of information, which is a website called thecollegescorecard.gov. So this is kind of a wonky website that policymakers and researchers like myself use all the time. It has a ton of information on every college in the country that participates in federal financial aid. It gives the information on what the graduation rate is first, which is what we're talking about. But then beyond that, it gives information on what are the earnings for graduates from each college across every single different major at those institutions. So when I talk about the idea of whether or not a college will pay and trying to make a decision based on that framework, this is the place to go. So you look at the colleges that you're considering applying to, and you go and see, well, graduates from this major at this college aren't doing that much better than high school graduates. Is it really worth me paying $20,000 or $30,000 a year to get this degree?
Okay, so collegescorecard.gov?
That's right.
That's what I put in there. Okay. Now, COVID was such a weird year and a half. My kid never had an in-person class that whole time in college, and it started to make us wonder about the value. So what is the curtain pulled back that we now know?
It was sort of amusing for me to watch this. For a long time, we've got college administrators kind of defending their very high price model, saying, the whole campus experience and the dorms and, being on campus with faculty and just having these beautiful quads, it's all part of the experience. And that's why it's so expensive, but that's what makes it magical, right? What we do is kind of like magic. And so then campuses all went online. And students said, now, wait a minute, where's my refund? Because I'm not getting that other, magic that came with like the being on campus, and proximity to faculty and all those things. And then college administrators said, oh, no, there's no refund because, you're still getting the credential. So there was kind of like a reverse course, right? They defend the high price tag by saying the all-inclusive thing is important, but then also defend that when it's just their credential, that's equally valuable. And so I think that pushed a lot of people to say, wait a minute, what am I paying for? What portion of that expense is the lazy river on campus and the climbing walls and the beautiful quads? And what is part of it is the credential, because I think a lot of people would be happy to strip away some of that extra if the credential by itself, meaning just the education and just, getting that diploma at the end, is really what's where the value is coming from.
Well, I'm old enough to tell you that I did college without any of those things, and we still managed to have a really good experience.
I think my college was ranked like one of the ugliest campuses in America at the time that I went. So yeah, it didn't seem to hold me back in any way.
Right. Okay. Anything else to add to this conversation before we say goodbye? And also get your questions in if you have any.
One thing I just want to add is that the point of my book and the advice that I give is not to say everyone should go out and try to make the most money they can, go to the college that will, put them on the path to the highest earnings, but rather I know that the financial aspect of going to college is critically important for so many families in this country. And I don't think that we give people the support to make decisions in that way because we're so romantic about the way that we think about and talk about college. So I'm just trying to give people permission to be a bit more practical and balance the finances in a new way.
It's great, but we're still stuck with the fact that it's hard to know what the school costs before we go down that whole path. So now could your next book be on how do we change that?
Yeah, I might have to start some new universities in order to do that. But I'll work on it from the policy side of things. How about that?
That sounds beautiful. Okay, Nancy says, thank you, Beth and Susan. Helpful information. I would have to agree. I think your approach as an economist is missing from the conversation. And so thank you for entering this space. I think it really makes us think about it differently. And hopefully at the end, just align our ability to pay with also having a good experience in college. There's no reason. There's enough colleges out there.
Right.
So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really nice.